Hello, and welcome to today's KDP University's At Home with Aleron Kong. I'm Trisha, and for the past 4.5 years, I've moved around Amazon's books teams, learning the business so I can share it with authors. But we're not here to talk to me. We're here to talk to Aleron. Aleron Kong is an African-American physician turned best-selling author. His comedic fantasy opera, The Land, has 8 novels and a main character that's an everyday kind of guy. This series has over 100,000 five-star reviews and has sold over 1 million copies. Chosen as Audible's customer favorite of the year, it has wide appeal whether you're reading or listening. The author is extremely proud of his fandom, which has raised over $100,000 for various charities over the past few years. 27 of his fans have also gotten tattoos of his artwork, and 2 babies have been named after his characters. His fans are united by the words through service, ascendance, through dedication, transcendence. Welcome, Aleron.
All right, I think that's working now. Thanks for the great intro.
There we go. More than welcome. So we really appreciate you joining us today.
Nah, I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad I got a second chance for the snafu the first one.
Absolutely. Well, I think that you've got a really great story that's really something that needs to be shared. So absolutely. Now, I want to start out by talking a little bit about the genre. Now, I've heard that you're the father of lit RPG, and this is a rather new genre, and some of our attendees may not have heard of it. Can you tell me a little bit about what lit RPG is?
Yeah, so lit RPG or literature role-playing game actually started either in Russia or Korea, usually depending if you ask a Russian or a Korean. And it incorporates video games and sci-fi fantasy. So as opposed to like when like Warcraft as a franchise had some books put out and it was just set into the Warcraft world, this would, if you did a lit RPG like that, you would literally see the characters level up from level 1 to level 2 to level 3. They would get quests. When they got new items, you would know exactly like what the strength of those items are and that kind of thing. So it's only really been in the US for about 5-6 years so far. And that moniker that one of my fans gave me, the Father of American Lit RPG, which has been a mixed bag walking around with it, has basically been not just because I was one of the first American authors to write in the genre, but because I was the one that created the social media following, just sort of like sparked it. I spent, 10,000 hours basically trying to like grow it. And now I'm very happy to say that as opposed to there being, 5 books for sale on Amazon, now we've got, 200 to 300 authors that are writing in the genre. So it's definitely like taking on a life of its own, move far, beyond me. But I still love it because when I first found it, I was like, video games and fantasy, like that's the dream. So yeah, that's how it all shook out.
So just a clarifying question. Now, are you writing in an existing video game world or are you creating your own world?
So I'm creating my own world, and honestly, pretty much every person that writes lit RPG is doing that, and that's one of the reasons it has such like wide appeal for like hardcore gamers, people that have always sort of loved the medium. You've always kind of wished like, oh, what if the AI was better? Oh, what if they'd spend more money on blah blah blah? Oh, if whatever. And unlike games that you're playing on the computer or a console, the only limitations are your imagination. And so if you get someone that has both creative and taking the time to flesh out their world, you really are seeing it like a completely new universe that is a lot of fun. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
So let's talk a little bit about what makes this different from regular sci-fis, or fantasy, because ultimately you're creating a fantasy world, but what's the trope that's different in lit RPG than what you would see in traditional fantasy?
So that's something that's been a topic of much discussion. And basically, we've had like 3 roundtables with, like I said, my Facebook group is pretty much the largest conglomeration of like lit RPG and fans that exist in the world. So like I think like once a year for the first 3 years, we kind of just like had like days long discussion about this, and we kind of brought it down to that there's like two basic commandments. One is that the main character is in a world that operates by game principles, meaning like there's an if then. If I fight enough characters, then I level up. If I'm nice enough to you, then your relationship with me improves. So one, that he's either in a game world or that his powers operate by video game principles. And the second one is that the world itself has to have some sort of aspect that lets him have a progression, right? So it's not just that there's, some montage in the book and suddenly you're stronger, right? It's that, okay, well, I'm doing this special training and now I'm an expert swordsman versus a basic swordsman. And that means that there's a very codifiable thing that you can sort of lay out. So it takes a lot of work to get like the math right and to have all the reference documents, because I always thought I was like the biggest nerd I knew until I found my tribe, and they are like out nerd me constantly. Like they'll be like, actually you're off by a decimal, and they'll just plaster it everywhere because they're so happy that they got me. So yeah, I'd say those are the two main things. There must be a clearly defined progression, and either the world or the main character operates by video game principles. So.
Gotcha. Thank you for clarifying that. I know that's
not easy.
To your point, it's a point of discussion out in the literary world.
Yeah.
So why did you choose to write in this genre, especially since it was relatively new?
Honestly, I never expected anyone to ever read my books. I thought that maybe one day I'd have a grandkid that found an old shoebox after I died and it had a manuscript in it and he'd be into it. I thought maybe my mother would read it. She hasn't read it, and that's a different story. But like, I never expected it to turn into this thing. I certainly never expected it to sort of lead me away from medicine into becoming a full-time writer. So when I did it, I just did it because I really fell in love. I read the first book and literally was like, oh my God, how? This is amazing. And I had sort of floated the idea to one of my best friends, James, who my main character is named after, that I might want to write a book for however long. And like I said, there were basically 4 books for sale on Amazon. And one of them was American and 2 were Russian. And there was a third one that was a Russian that was obviously Google Translate. It was basically like stick, hit, hard, dog, unhappy, happy, lucky, good, like it was garbage. But even with that, I was still consuming all of those on rotation, even the one that was barely English, because I just loved it so much. And I was just complaining, like, why isn't there something better out there? And then I realized, I'm like, why complain? Why not just like try to put it out there? So, I was like, let me just give this a shot. And my fear, I think, is the same fear that everyone has ever had when they wrote their first book. Like, how could I ever make enough words to fill up a page? But I found out that I had the opposite issue. Like, I had already put out all these plot arcs that I wanted to get to. And when I finished the first book, I realized that I was 1% to, on my progression to the first plot arc. And then I was able to write my first 6 novels in 14 months. So they sort of just came out like every 2.5 months, like clockwork. And so it almost like it just poured out of me the story that I wanted to tell, and almost happened before I even knew what was happening. So it wasn't really like a decision, I think, that a lot of authors that sort of have known they wanted to do it make, right? It wasn't like, okay, well, this is where I'm going to plant my flag. It's just that I loved it. I wanted to grow it. And that's why I made the social media group, and I wanted more people to be in it. And luckily, it all just sort of like laid out perfectly, which has been amazing. So.
Well, good. So my understanding is you mentioned or alluded to the fact that you were a physician, but before taking on writing. So this was never your plan to switch over to writing.
Never.
This was a lark. It was something.
Yeah, it was literally sort of like just like a psychological exercise. I felt like I needed something to balance out the severity of the hospital. So I'm an internal medicine physician, and I worked at a hospital. So I'm called a hospitalist because we're not good at naming things. But basically, I would deal with like heart attacks, strokes, broken bones, pneumonia, like the bread and butter things that get you admitted. And I was working nights, and I had just finished residency, which is just the most intense time that you can go through.
Mhm.
And I wanted another expression of like creativity. I mean, I basically had just been so like hardcore cerebral numbers for a decade and a half to get through my training. Something inside me was like yearning for whatever else. And I thought, okay, well, this will be a good balance. You know, I'm not flexible enough for yoga, so let's give this a shot. And it just sort of became, like I said, it took on a life of its own. And I don't know, like writing the books has sort of felt like an act of creation that I feel like very much saved me. Like I'm a happier, more complete person now. And so like that's sort of the pivotal thing. But then the secondary thing, which is right after it, is that I've been able to connect with people like around the world that I never would have spoken to. I've been able to
Mhm.
impact people that write me like, you know, these letters that are just like heartrending, but they're like, you know, I was looking for my tribe too. I was feeling like I was at the end. And then they're finding connection in the community, which is really humbling and awesome. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's sort of I feel like I sparked it, but like, you know, definitely grown, you know, warmer than I could have made it by myself. So, yeah.
So how long were you doing both? How long was the overlap before you
Yeah.
decided to walk away from your career as a physician?
So I was writing, I wrote all 6 books while I was working night shifts. So I would see a patient
Mhm.
and I'd call the ER and say, is there anything else going on? And they're like, not for 2 hours. And so I'd write for an hour and a half and then I'd see my patients and do whatever. So that overlapped for a good sort of 5 years, basically.
Okay.
And then I kind of just got tired of working nights because I'd been doing that for 5 years straight. And I thought, hey, so I'll, you know, step away from medicine for like 3 months while I look for another job. I'll take a nap. And I when I left my job, I literally did sleep for about 14 hours a day for a month straight. Like I just hadn't
Oh,
slept in
wow.
a decade and a half. Um,
Mhm.
but then when I was after I took that long nap and became just a nicer person, like everyone was like, "You're just a nicer person." I'm like, you know, things just aren't that bad anymore. Like, you know, somebody cut me off and I was like, look at this joker. And they're like, who are you? Why aren't you cutting this person out? Yeah. So, I mean, I hadn't really ever taken the time off, but I was like, okay, well, let's call it 6 months. You know, I've worked for long enough. I'm handling this. Let me invest. And then that 6 months became a year. And then that year has become 2 years now. But yeah, I mean, so I did it I finished my training. And then I worked for 5 years for Kaiser and now it's 2 years out. So yeah,
Wow.
kind of been a crazy road.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Now you
Yeah.
self-publish. Was there
Yes.
when you were getting started, were you thinking of going after traditional publishing deals, or was it just
Yeah.
let me self-publish this?
No, I absolutely was because all I knew about, you know, publishing was what I'd seen on TV. So the thought process is, what am I gonna just like send out my manuscript 1,000 times, and then one time somebody's fighting with their boyfriend, so they sit down in a party and they read it and they fall in love, and then we're bestsellers. Like, I mean, that was basically all I knew about publishing. And then my buddy James, again, who was super supportive and one of the reasons that I started this journey, he was like, his friend self-publishes, and he
Mhm.
was like, yeah, do you want to talk to him? And I'm like, yeah. And I never even knew that was possible that you could self-publish. I'd never heard of it
Mhm.
before. And honestly, even now, like when people are like, hey, I've always wanted to write a book, I'm like, well, I self-publish. And they're like, that's possible? Like people still have no idea.
Right.
So I figured, you know, that sounds pretty good. That sounds pretty easy. And so, yeah, I just upload, I was writing the book. And then one day I was like, I've been writing a while. How long is a book supposed to be? And I looked it up and it said 70,000 words. And I was like, I'm at 75. And I'm like, this is a book. And that was basically how it all shook out.
Mhm.
There was no like master plan behind it. Um, and then, so yeah, I had these very like indie grunge covers for the first 4 books that I
Mhm.
put out. And yeah, just sort of uploaded it and then sort of went from there. And then after I started, you know, learning more about the indie sphere and after I started whatever, I still had this idea that like, well, self-publishing is for real authors. That's what we should do. And then I started educating myself about it more though, and really just sort of just saw how, you know, if you're a Sanderson or you're a Butcher or you're a Patterson, then yes, you are the golden god, you know, nobody can touch you, whatever. But there's a lot of people that are not a Sanderson or not a Butcher, not a whatever. And, you know, the grass is like honestly much greener on the indie side, depending on if you have the wherewithal to learn the things that traditional publishing typically offers you,
Mm-hmm.
then, it sort of like really equalizes the playing field. And what's interesting is that when I was first starting out, I think I had 2 books out. I reached out to, I think, a couple of imprints, and they were like, yeah, we've heard about your little genre. It's a flash in the pan. Like, one guy was like, look, I'm not supposed to tell you this, but I'm going to level with you. There's been an internal memorandum not to take any of you guys seriously, but you seem like a cool dude. So just don't waste your time here anymore. Just enjoy it while it works. And I'm like, okay. And I was like, well, this is working for me. And then I think about the time that like my 5th or 6th book was coming out, and it was sort of, the last 2 had been in the top 100, and that one was in the top 25 on Amazon. And I wasn't the only one doing it. Like, there's Little Kraut and Michael Chatham, other people were crushing it. And so they're then having these conversations with traditional publishers who are, basically like, hey, kid, we'll take a chance on you. And they're offering the you don't know anything about publishing deals. And they're getting laughed at by these other authors that are like, hey, man, like, you don't have any authors that are ranking higher than me right now. So why would whatever? And so I really feel like there was this sort of like reaction in the traditional publishing sort of sphere, like, who would do this? Like, why would whatever? But it's not overly surprising, because I think people are shocked when they hear that online gaming is an $18 billion a year industry, and that Twitch is, tens or hundreds of million, like whatever. And they're like, well, what's Twitch? It's like, oh, it's when you watch people play video games. It's like, who would do that? Unless you've watched people play video games and you're like, well, that was like my whole weekend. Like, you're just sort of sitting there, or you're hearing that kids are getting scholarships that are more financially powerful playing games in college than they are playing football anymore. But I think it's just like, it's a changing world, in the same way that there's still in 2020 a bunch of people that maybe want to write a book and have no idea that you can self-publish. There's a bunch of publishers out there that are just, maybe still think ebooks are a fad, or they're just sort of looking down on these new genres and not getting that there's like massive tribes of people out there that really add up. So that was a long answer. Sorry about that. But yeah,
that's okay.
Great.
So let's talk about your tribe for a minute. How did you find your reader base? I think that's a really good call out, and one that we get a question about all the time.
Yes. All right. So I would say that it's a combination of hard work, humility, and just sort of the willingness to put yourself out there. So for my first book, like, the question is like, how do you even, get, anyone knows about your book, right? So I will say that I was lucky enough that when I started writing Lit RPG, like I said, there were 4 other books out there. So the 80 other guys that were reading those books, like, if I was able to get in touch with them. So that was back when Amazon still had forums that were active, which is, 5 years ago now. And basically I just reached out to, I like looked up top 100, top 250, sci-fi authors that existed. And I was like, hi, I'm Aleron. I wrote a book. Can I tell people about it? And there were like 95% no responses. And then there were 4%, get out of here, kid. And then there was 1% like, sure, I mean, please just stop emailing me, kind of thing. So for those 1%, I was like, hey, I wrote a book. I'd really appreciate if you guys would take it out. And to my shock and amazement, people were like, wow, I'm really enjoying this. And then I was like, well, there's another one coming. And then I just sort of thought about it. I was like, oh, I should reach out to the whatever group is on social media for Lit RPG, and there was none that existed. So then I created that, and it gave like, the 1 or 2 other authors like a place to go, and their fans a place to go. And I always had just a very simple sort of premise. I'm like, if you're an author and you want to advertise in a group, you can do it once a week, because you're not gonna nobody likes it when it's just a wallpaper or whatever. And that actually caused a huge schism with some authors. They're like, you're not gonna tell me what to do. And I'm like, don't pull the American out of me. It's not pretty. But so after getting through that, and the other point is like, if you want to advertise, then you help the next guy. So put a link and be like, if you want to find other people, whatever, which caused the second schism, which is why there's now 3 Facebook groups for it. But for the most part, it worked, right? Because it's like, everyone that's been on the internet knows there's a bunch of trolls, but you also know there's just a bunch of normal people that just want to have a good time. They don't want to get stressed out. They want an oasis away from things. So, I mean, like, we just had very simple rules, like, don't bring your drama in here. Don't, start trouble. Don't cuss people out. And it actually took an insane amount of work to like sort of cultivate that out. But then once you have a good
Right.
group, it starts reinforcing itself. So that's half of the hard work. The other half is that I made myself accessible personally with my email and whatever. And I'd say for the first 2 years, I had literally spent 3 hours a day responding to every email, every DM, every Instagram message, and just being like, I am so thankful that you read this book. Thank you for whatever. And I would get the
Mm-hmm.
same response over and over. I have never had an author respond when I wrote them before. I have never had someone tell me thank you. And I'm like, your fans are why this is possible. Like, what is wrong with you
Right.
people? Like, just be nice to them. It's not complicated. It's like, how do you talk to a
Mm-hmm.
woman? Don't shout at her. Step one, like, just be a normal
Yeah.
human being. And that's the willingness to, like, sort of put yourself out there kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And you have, like I said, you have to wade through some trolls. I've gotten some very charged messages from people. I had to deal with some very unpleasant characters, but I've also been able to create a space that people come to because they like the books, but they stay because they like the camaraderie and the friendship
Mm-hmm.
and the other things they find there. So I mean, that's basically it. You want to get started. It very much seems like the old school hustle that I used to see from dudes on the corner. It's like every day you're trying to figure out what you can do. You try something, it doesn't work, you try something else, and then that's getting your foot in the door. And then once you
Mm-hmm.
have that, you just like be like, guys, come on, let me show you that I appreciate you. Let me do whatever. You get to a certain point, you do a bunch of giveaways. You joke around. You start expanding the merch. You listen to people when they tell you. It's been one of the things that's been difficult for me as an artist is sort of navigating getting feedback from people, but also being like
Mm-hmm.
true to my word. I
Right.
had like 5,000 exclamation points in my first draft of my first book. Everything was shouting, and it was insane. It was literally just a giant phallic representation of the book. It was just exclamation point, exclamation point. And like that was good feedback for me to take to not do that. But then there's other people that are like, we want this and we want this and whatever. And it's like, if you let yourself be bullied from pillar to post, then you're just going to
Mm-hmm.
turn into whatever generic bland stuff that they're not reading because they're reading you. And you have to sort of
Mm-hmm.
recognize that about humanity. So it's a balancing act, and it's more art than science, but it really comes down to hustle to get your name out there, and then once people come,
Mm-hmm.
be nice to them. Don't be a dick. Just be a nice
Mm-hmm.
person. That's it. So
Good call out.
yeah.
So let's go back to the exclamation points all over the first one and talk
Mhm.
about editors.
Yeah.
So who'd you have edit your first book, or did you?
So I hired 3 different editors throughout my first 2 books, and honestly, every one of them was a crook. Every one of them was a waste of time and money. It was not so good. Now, I know, like I've had conversations with Sanderson and Butcher and like the other masses, and like they've got amazing editors, right? Who are pretty much only working with Sanderson, Butcher, whatever. I remember asking Sanderson, like, who does your marketing? He's like, that's really tough. So I found 3 smart kids and sent them to school. And 3 years later, I now have a marketing team. And it's like, that's a level of, like, you're not going to be doing that if you're still working your side hustle at whatever.
Right.
So as far as editing, I think what I found to be useful is I had a couple beta readers from my fans, and like right on my second book was coming out, who loved it. The people that were just the most intense. And so I had them sign an NDA and a work for hire, so there'd be no legal issues with any of that kind of stuff. And then basically they got to see my stuff early and go through it. And it was sort of an evolving thing where, maybe it wouldn't work out with one person, or maybe it did work out, whatever else. And then you sort of just see like, all right, well, some of these people are just kind of their fans, but they just sort of want to see it first and not really yet. So now it's basically me, 2 people, and I think I'm going to add a 3rd person because the other 2 have been with me from like the beginning. And basically what's going to happen is like when I'm about to put this new book out, and they're going to get it first, and they're going to be able to go back on a Google document, and they know each other and they know me. So they are like the most Thoreauiest, Emersoniest, like English literaturiest, whatever. And, I'm writing, dick jokes and like, in prose, but also referencing Bartleby the Scrivener. So, we've kind of got like our shorthand going where I let them review it for a week, and it's just an explosion of notes. And they go, okay, we've gone a little much. and then they winnow it down a little bit, and then I respond. And that's basically what's happened. I get it to them, and then I take it and I read it again, and I mark it up, and then I send it to them, and they mark it up. And when we do that 5 times, we've caught pretty much at this point like 99% of the errors and the other stuff. And then at the end of the book, I'm like, thank you. I'm an indie author. Please don't be mean. If there's an issue, email me. And the great thing about being an indie is like I can upload a corrected version 1 hour later. So that's how it works. But so I mean, that's what's worked for me. Other people swear by their editors. It's more, like I said, it's more art than science. But for me, fans that really love it and have the wherewithal and that can go through it with me, I've gotten better, so there's less mistakes for them to catch, and they've gotten better. I mean, that's just sort of how it works.
Well, good. That's a great way to kind of talk through and find the editing that works best for you, because it's not going to a traditional author that isn't really a fan or is well versed in the genre is going to be more difficult for you, and it's going to be a big challenge. So thank you for sharing that.
I'm happy to help.
So let's talk about what it felt like the first time you hit the bestsellers list. What was that like?
Surreal, if there's one piece of advice I can give you is put a Google alert with your name, because when you make the Wall Street Journal's bestseller list, like they don't email you. Like I would have no idea that I was a Wall Street Journal bestseller if I did not. And I was like, really? That's great. I had no idea. You don't get a block of cheese. There's nothing. So do that. So I have a buddy who's a musician, and he would be here with me as I'm like, hey, this book did such and such. It's really good. And he would just be like, do you understand? And I'm like, I don't know what you want. I got to write something else. I got to go see a patient. I got to do whatever. And it never really occurred to me that I was breaking through these barriers because I didn't know that the barriers existed. And I will say that that's been a slight point of contention with some other authors that I've met. And they're like, you haven't paid your dues. You haven't done whatever. Like, you don't know my pain. You have not eaten squirrel, like kind of thing. And I think it's just like everything else. Like there's a mixture of luck. There's a bunch of hard work, and you just sort of have to try new things, all the time. Like I always felt like the 3 things that make a winner are you don't give up, you try new things, and you just persevere. And that's it. Like, but so, sort of hitting these milestones is great, but they're not like sort of what fill me. Like when I hit the Wall Street Journal bestseller thing, I immediately was like, okay, well, we're going to put this on all the covers. Why? Because I want to sell more books, not because I'm thinking some random person that's never going to talk to me, I need them to be impressed. It's like, this is an if-then statement kind of thing. That's great. Why do I put up that, like, I was Audible's customer favorite of the year? Because I want to sell more audiobooks. I mean, it's just as simple as that. It's not a complicated thing. So, like, I'm proud of what I've done, but it's not what fills me. Like, it's cool, but, like, I much love the fact that, like, I've got fans in almost every country, and we can joke around about stuff. And, people can come here, and they're like, yo, I had the hardest day, let me tell you. And people will just sort of discuss it. Like, people will share the things they're going through in their family and find, 500 to 1,000 people that are like, I'm here with you. That we can, when all of this was first going on in the pandemic, we raised $6,000 to help people keep their lights on, put food in their fridge. We're doing the same thing now. Like that 100, I'm so proud of my fandom because they're not here just for me, but we have raised 6 figures to help other people that like require it, right? So like just being able to find a bunch of like-minded people that are just normal human beings that are just good, it even helps keep me sane when I'm looking at CNN every day and I'm like, my God, the world is horrible. And it's like, well, it's not all horrible. And that's and I hope that they get the same thing. Does that make sense?
Good. Yeah. So building that community of readers, and that's amazing that you're being able to pull them together and focus them on causes. So that's the kind of stuff that changes the world, little by little.
That's the plan. So, I mean, and honestly, that was the thought process when I, made a Black main character and when I put my face and my real name up, because, I mean, classically, especially sci-fi fantasy, it's been very homogenous as far as like, middle-aged white men are sort of running the thing. Now,
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that I think all of us feel like there's a lot of things in the world that we'd like to change. We just sort of
Hmm.
disagree on the method and what we want changed. But what I found
Right.
is that yelling at someone on the internet never actually does anything. And there's
Hmm.
people that just feed on it. It's like that old saying, like, don't wrestle with pigs, they love the mud. You just get dirty. It doesn't accomplish anything. So when I was thinking about
Hmm.
what could, I thought that systematic desensitization could be a positive thing, meaning that
Hmm.
people are inundated with horrible things like you can't trust them, they're all thieves, she's gonna whatever, blah, blah, blah. And they've been hearing this from the knee, unfortunately, sometimes. So how do you combat that?
Hmm.
Well, if people always have an idea about what it means to be a black man, and yet they then fall in love with my character and they see me and I don't fit that paradigm, maybe 1 out of 100 will go, maybe I need to question some of this.
Hmm.
Maybe just by putting it out there, right, and normalize, like in my books, I don't really go deep into gender relations, but women are just as good warriors as men, and we never really discuss it. Maybe the idea is not that I need to beat you over the head with the stick that I'm trying to get you to learn, but instead, if I just put it
Hmm.
out there, you can start questioning it, and that's the hope. So yeah, that's the plan. That's what it's the faith that keeps me going. So.
Well, good. And I know that sometimes there's a little bit of conflict with whether or not you do assign race to characters.
Mhm.
So I think it's amazing that you've stuck with, let's make this a normal, wonderful person that's my
Mhm.
hero, and he's black.
Yeah, I mean, simple as that. I mean, and what's funny is that, so I mean, my fans pretty much know it now, but I'd say at least once a month for the last 5 years, there's always someone that's like, I want Jason Statham to play Richter, who's my main character in the movie, and everyone else is like, he's black, and then they say, no, he's not, and then it goes on for 100 comments, and then I go, he's black, like Wakanda black, he's black, 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 and then there's people that will argue with me. It's like, I don't think so, and I'm like, I'm the author. And it's like, if ever there was a need to show that there, the necessity of this systematic desensitization, it's the idea that like
Hmm.
people are threatened by a female character, and she's fictional. But even the idea that
Hmm.
she could be strong is something that is a problem. Or even the idea that there's a positive black image is the problem. Or even the idea that,
Hmm.
there's these other, like, a Muslim character or a gay character or whatever, right? I feel like it's just it just shows the deep-seated issues that are there that people aren't even really aware of and get upset if
Right,
you sort of point them out. And so you're not going to change these people by making them feel stupid. It's not about winning,
right,
right?
right,
It's about
right.
us as a society surviving somehow, and that's I'm
Hmm.
trying to do my small part for that. So
Well, good, good. Now, you have a new series coming out.
I do.
What's that?
Okay.
You're like, what? Yeah.
So it's called God's Eye. It is a lit
Uh-huh.
RPG as well. It
Hmm.
is peripherally associated with my main series, The Land.
Hmm.
But you're not going to have the same characters. It's a darker series. I've always sort of loved that C.S. Lewis sort of mirrored our progression from childhood to adulthood in his books getting
Hmm.
progressively, more intense. And I've been doing the same thing with my
Right.
books, but I'm also going to do the same thing with my series, where you're getting like into darker content. We're sort of looking at the things that we don't really want to, shine too much bright a light on inside of us when you are in certain, scenarios. And I've always thought that was the real power of sci-fi fantasy, right? Like it's not the
Hmm.
dragons and it's not the lasers, right? It's being able to create a scenario that allows us to take a closer look at the human condition. Like The Walking Dead is
Hmm.
not about zombies, right? Those aren't the scary
Right.
parts. It's the human beings and what they're doing. So yeah, I
Right.
mean, we're basically going to be looking at that. It's sort of this. I mean, I'm taking the same approach where I'm not like beating anyone over the head with it, but we're going to be looking at like, well, what is the effect of a societal impulse? What is the effect of like the control mechanisms that exist in it? Whether it
Hmm.
be political party, whether it be religion, whether it be your race, whether it be where we're coming from, and how do you navigate that? And at the
Hmm.
same time, like I said, just a bunch of like ridiculous jokes and ultra violence from my medical stories. And yeah, so, and just a new world building. And that's the part that I love the most, creating a new world that operates by fantasy principles, but also is internally consistent, and could
Hmm.
happen. kind of thing. I think that people like me really love the idea that like we're only this far from that possibly being true. So yeah.
Any concern with the fact that maybe some of your core readers read your book as an escape mechanism going into that darker, kind of darker world? Does that scare you that you might lose some of those core readers?
Yeah, I mean, there's always a thought process that's like, okay, well, if I'm not pandering, then
Hmm.
do I lose them, right? When I made a Black Lives Matter post when this was going on, and it was mostly positive, and I lost 50 followers in that day, but I gained 80 followers, sort of the next
Hmm.
day. Um, I think that people should not just sort of spew whatever pops into their head. Like you should have intelligence and tact and things like that. But at the same time, you shouldn't be afraid to go wherever your art is taking you and,
Hmm.
be willing to roll the dice that people will meet you there. Now,
Hmm.
if you're getting some feedback and you're hearing the same thing 1,000 times, you should at least take a look at yourself and be like, what is it all about? But for me, the creating these worlds and connecting with these people is sort of the main point, right? And
Hmm.
I'm like, an example is that in my 7th book, so in every one of my books, I look at a different topic of social awareness, and do it in a way
Okay.
that most people never even really notice. You should be aware of your audience, and you should be aware of the impact of the words that you say. But you should not be
Hmm.
afraid to say them if you feel like the benefit outweighs the cost. And one of the examples I was giving is that in my 7th book, in every one of my books, I sort of touch on a different type of social awareness. And in my
Hmm.
7th book, I sort of tackled the idea of sexual assault in our society, which obviously is extremely personal and extremely horrific thing that too many people have to live through. And I
Hmm.
did it in a way that was graphic enough to have an impact on people and then also to give them a resolution, ideally. And some of the
Hmm.
feedback I got was, I can never read your books again. This bothers me, or this triggered something. No, please. But then I also had people write to me and saying, this is swept under the rug way too much, and
Hmm.
people need to be aware of how I and other people have been made to feel. So thank you. Um, and
Hmm.
I very much believe that if we're going to make the world a safer place, one of the casualties is going to be our comfort zone.
Hmm.
So that's what I believe, and I'm willing to accept the consequences of that. I'm not going to
Hmm.
waggle my finger at someone else that decides to do it a different way, either more extreme or less, because I just feel like
Hmm.
as long as you're willing to, deal with the consequences as an adult, more power to you. Um,
Hmm. I think that's an excellent point. And it's a hard one.
mhm,
Um, so one of the things that our attendees always want to know is about
mhm.
marketing. I think that that's the once you get through writing and then publishing
Yeah.
and then you go into marketing, that's always the big question. And it sounds from our conversation that your marketing is more organic and it's definitely
Mhm.
focused around social media. Is that correct?
Absolutely. In my opinion, if you want to be an indie author and be successful, you have to have social media. Period. End of statement. That's it. Now, obviously, there's different modalities for social media. There's that old rule that if you want to be relevant on Facebook, you post every 3 days. You want to be relevant on, Instagram, you post every, 8 hours, and Twitter, you basically just nonstop, stream, or like 5 or 7 posts a day. So for me, I was like, God, I could not do Twitter. I barely did Instagram, so I did Facebook. And honestly,
Uh-huh.
I didn't even take it because I mean, keep in mind as well, like I never expected this to happen. So it's been in starts and
Hmm.
stops. Initially, I intentionally did not make my own Facebook things because I wanted my success and fame to fuel the genre and help other authors. Now, after I was
Hmm.
bit by that particular dog multiple times, I was like, well, I'm going to make my own stuff, forget y'all. And I'll just like, I have my mods that keep it going. So it continues to help the new
Hmm.
people. But yeah, like I've spent tens of thousands of dollars in various things, Amazon ads, Facebook ads, book funnel. I mean, you name it, I've pretty much done it. And I haven't really seen it move the needle overly much. I mean, I think most people have heard of like that, computer study they've done where they track people's eyes, and we are automatically sort of trained to not look at advertisements. So I think that when I was first starting out, using those ads probably had some sort of yield for me. But I also know like authors that like get their PhDs in Amazon marketing, whatever, like they are tracking down to the smallest iota of keyword, blah, blah, blah. I honestly just feel like it's a shell game to a certain extent. I feel like the people that are making Amazon don't really know how it works, to be quite honest. I feel like it very much can be helpful, but you also have to recognize that it's like playing the stock market. It's kind of a gamble. It can pay off, but don't think that you're cracking the code because you're competing with, Warren Buffett. And in here, you're competing with Patricia Briggs and J.K. Rowling. And I don't care how good you are, like their team of crack assassins is probably doing it better than you are. So I think it can be useful, but I don't think there's anything as powerful as just connecting with other human beings, finding a place where they can go, getting those emails for your newsletter, getting those likes on your whatever, so that when you are ready to put a new book out, you've got 5,000, 10,000, 30,000 people that like you can notify. And if you've been treating them well, they want to read your next book. It's not that complicated, but it takes work. Like I said, I literally spent 3 to 4 hours a day for 2 years responding to every single email and tweet and whatever that I got. And I made it as simple, and like people, and I've got something like 4,100 or 4,200 reviews on my first book on Amazon, which is really, really big for an indie author. And how did I do that? I'd say, thank you so much for replying. And now please leave a review, because I checked with Amazon forever ago. You cannot buy them, but shamelessly begging like a little pauper is absolutely okay. So I would just beg them, and I'd say 1 out of 100 would leave a review. And if you keep doing that, it adds up, and then ideally you sell more books. That's it.
Now, how much of do you think social media and knowing that you're lit RPG, right? So that's role-playing games, then your audience may naturally be on social media. How much of that do you think impacts your ability to market on social media more successfully than maybe using some of the other marketing strategies?
I mean, so it's a hard question to ask. It's like taking an SAT prep course and being like, you did good. How good do you think the other ones? Like, well, I didn't really take the other ones. I will say that having gamers typically are more tech savvy, but I also have a very wide range of fans. Like I've got little 12-year-olds where I'm like, okay, make sure your parents know you're reading the scene. What's going on? And then I also have this like amazing picture of this like 96-year-old Marine holding a katana and wearing one of my shirts, being like, love your books, buddy. And it's like, man, how many wars have you been in? Like he's so old, but he's amazing and he's awesome. So having like a large following, sort of that crosses, I mean, I feel like it sort of equalizes out as far as people that are accessible. Because also my main things are on Facebook, and kids these days think that's for dinosaurs. They're on Discord, they're on TikTok, they're on whatever. And I just don't even have like the energy to even download the apps to start doing marketing, that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I've been very successful in carving out my kingdom and how I'm doing it, but I'm not even scratching the surface on like what I think you could do if you were really, really about that kind of thing. But also, I don't think that I have the same goals or ambitions of some people to do, whatever. Like I would love to have Sanderson's audience, right? But like I'll be okay if I stay with my audience, right? The organic growth that I have, like it's totally good enough. Now, with that being said, like I am a capitalist. Sanderson audience, come on down. But at the same time, like it's fine. It depends on what matters to you. It doesn't matter to me that I'm on the cover of blah 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 unless blah 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 is selling more books that I can then use to barbecue and buy more booze for my friends to hang out at a pool. Like that's the kind of person that I care about. It doesn't matter. Like it would be really cool to be in Barnes and Noble on the bookshelves, but I don't really care, and I'm certainly not willing to trade what I have as an indie to do that unless there were a lot more things that came along with it to do, to go the traditional route. So I mean, for me, I'm a very if-then statement kind of guy, and you have to I think you have to ask yourself what your real goals are. If your goal is to like have the accolades and have everyone, think you're Golden Buddha child, whatever, then you have to do X, Y, and Z. I just want to, play some video games, write some books, connect with some good people, and chill out. So, yeah.
I think priorities, definitely.
Yeah, that's how I roll. That's not complicated. So, yeah.
So we have a question that came in. What specific strategies are useful to build email lists? So what did you do to organically build that email list, or what did you do?
So, I mean, if you have a website, then you go on like privy.com or use the stuff that's already in Squarespace and have pop-ups and people will sign up that way. If you have a Facebook page or a Facebook group and people come in, then you can ask them for their emails if they are willing to share that. There are authors that make a sort of like a lot of energy into sharing email lists. I've never really been a big fan of that because what we all hate is spam mail. I mean, like we all hate that. And it's like if 10 authors are sharing whatever, I mean, wouldn't you be pissed and just delete all of them maybe? Or, I mean, so for me, again, the organic way of just having like at the end of every one of my books is, my website, my Facebook, my newsletter, my whatever. And, some people are really into doing that with email and some people absolutely hate it. And you have to have enough modalities out there that the one that person normally uses, you're accessible on. I am sure I am losing a bunch of people by not really being on Twitter, but I am not willing to invest what it takes to be on Twitter. I am not on TikTok. I have a Discord server that I honestly have no idea what is happening on there because just enough people ask me and I'm like, all right, you're in charge now. I don't know what they're doing on there, to be quite honest. I don't look because I just kind of don't want to know. As far as building your thing, make sure you're accessible. Make sure that no matter where someone looks, all of your info is, and be thorough about that. And I guess that's the best advice that I can give. And generally, if you're moving at a good clip and you've written enough books, it seems like you get to 20,000. That seems like the big number for a lot of indie authors after like, 2 to 4 years.
Okay. So, okay. Yeah. So any thoughts on hiring a few more people to help you with that social media, the newer social media, maybe Twitch or
so I mean,
TikTok
I would if I could find people that were worthwhile. If you hire anyone in marketing, the very first thing that they say to you is, okay, so it's going to take 3 to 4 months to see a return, which would be true if they were doing good things, but it's also true if they're completely just wasting your money. And so I've gone on that rabbit hole once or twice, and they use a lot of jargon, and I'm pretty good at math, thankfully. And I'll be like, all right, but isn't this because of this? And they're like, and I'm like, all right, you're fired. Like, this is ridiculous. So yeah, like if I found someone that like was legitimately knew what they were talking about, and like they were like, hey, I've grown this other account from blah blah blah, and they're not bots, I would hire said person. But it's not really easy to find said person because they're typically already being hired by, Kevin Hart and The Rock and whoever else is doing that kind of thing. I mean, again, you are competing with people that like are like world-class manipulators of the social data thing. So yeah, for me, it'd absolutely be worth investing the money in it if there was somebody that was good. And if you know anyone, send me an email afterwards. Like, absolutely, I'm about that life. But I've got this awesome assistant who knows my moods and tells me when I need to calm down, I need a cookie, and we work really, really well. So if there's someone that I could add to the team, great. But again, I'm okay if we can't find it, So.
Gotcha. All right. Let's see if we've got time for one more question.
Oh, I've spent too much time chatting.
No, you're absolutely fine. This has been great. Um, so we have a lot of new authors that are joining us today. What is the one biggest mistake that you made as a new author, if you had to pick one?
Um, I know I sort of glossed over the trials of dealing with certain personalities, but I would say, as for me, that has been the thing that was the largest headache. Um, I was hoping that when I became an author, I would be surrounded by people that wanted to discuss Descartes and, the unbearable likeness of being and whatever. And it was just a bunch of mean girls that were unfortunately 45-year-old
Oh,
men. So I would say you need to be very cognizant of who you are listening to. I mean, like, the Machiavellianness of it is insane. There was a period of time where authors that were bad actors were making fake obituaries and then sending those obituaries into Facebook, because Facebook had a policy that if you say that someone's dead, they'll deactivate their page and delete their data. And
oh
it's like,
no.
who would come up with that? And then there was a patch that was made so they couldn't do it anymore, but it happened to like 7 different people. So I would just say, like, be honest about like who you are. Be very cognizant about who gives you advice. I also know that there are authors that will intentionally give new authors bad advice, so they never become powerful enough to challenge it. I mean, like, it's insane, the thought process, but it's really what occupies a bunch of people. So for me, I would have just, not tried to be a peacemaker and doing whatever. I would have just, marched on and just, did my work a little bit more and not have been wasted as much energy as I did trying to make people better, I guess. And it's
Hmm.
like, there's trolls on the internet. Like, do your thing, try to block it out as much as you can and move on with your life. Otherwise, like, you're gonna find yourself sort of just inundated with all of this, like, social righteousness that accomplishes nothing. Like, you want to do something effective, write a book. You want to grow your
Hmm.
fandom, be nice to people. You want to, sell more books, look at the people that are selling more books, and then don't try to reinvent the wheel. Be like, wow, they did blah blah blah. Can I scale that down to my size? And try.
Hmm.
It's not
Hmm.
complicated. But what will waste your energy and your time and your soul is getting in. Like I said, don't get into fights with pigs. Like, they love being in the mud. It's not worth it. Yeah.
Good advice. So on the flip side, I'm going to flip that over. Uh,
Okay.
what's the best thing that you did as a brand new writer?
I would say getting the social media stuff together and being nice to people.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, and like, when I got that moniker, the father of American Lit RPG, there were like 40 fans. And I remember one day he was like, "Hey man, you're like this," and I'm like, "Dude, that sounds awesome. Yeah, call me that." And um, and then that was like the seed that grew, this whole tree. And it comes slow, but I would say that, like, yeah, the social media marketing, but then also, as far as my writing something that I wanted to read and not trying to pander to what I thought other people wanted. Because I think
Mhm.
that we kind of know when we're getting some BS that's just regurgitated, whatever. And we all want something that's a little bit cooler and a little bit fresher. And you'd be surprised how many people do things like you, do feel like you, have been waiting for a voice to actualize the things they didn't even know were going on inside of them. So yeah, I'd
Mhm.
say be honest with yourself and share that with the world, and then just sort of let the chips fall where they may.
Good advice. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. It's
I was
been
happy to
such
help.
an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, happy to help. Happy to help. I mean, and I know I didn't hit a lot of the questions. I'm happy to respond to people in another modality if I know that we're out of time here.
Mhm.
But I feel bad. I know there were a bunch. So I don't know if how we can make that happen,
Is
but
there,
I'd be happy to.
well, is there a way that people can contact you? Is there
Yeah.
a contact that you want to?
So you can, I mean, I guess my social media stuff will be on here, but you can send me a message through Facebook. That's really easy. Or you can email me. It's RICHTER at litrpg, selfpublish.rpg.com. You can email me there, or Twitter. I mean, like I'm super accessible. You literally just need to type my name in and all my info comes up immediately. But no, I'm happy to answer anything that I can. So, yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And for everybody who's in attendance, just a reminder that I will be sending an email follow-up tomorrow with a link to the recording to today's event. But if you go to our YouTube channel, which is Kindle Direct Publishing YouTube channel, it'll be posted tonight, so you get a preview before the email comes out tomorrow. And as always, happy publishing, everyone.
Peace, love, Perfect Margarita. See you later.